Dear John Fermon, thanks for joining us today. You will join to the Kurdish Assembly's event in the Labour Party's conference. So let's start with, first of all, why do you think the PKK has been listed as a terrorist organization in Europe?
Well, that is of course a purely political question. PKK has not committed any acts of violence against European countries or in European countries, apart from, a demonstration or not terrorist attacks as such. And I think the basic reason why PKK was listed as a terrorist organization is because Turkey is a NATO country, and so fighting the Turkish state is in fact indirectly fighting NATO, and therefore NATO countries listed PKK as a terrorist organization.
Is it political that still the PKK is in the list? Why do you think that still they keep the PKK in the list?
I think it's for purely political reasons. When the Belgian court decided in 2020 that PKK was not a terrorist organization but a party to a civil war, and therefore was not that the anti-terrorist law did not apply to PKK, but that the laws of war applied to the whole conflict, immediately the Belgian government made a statement the next day saying that the executive, the government, would continue to consider PKK as a terrorist organization, and that was a clearly political stand. And also, when we look into the origin of the case, in which 42 members of the Kurdish community, representatives, members, leaders of organizations, etc., were prosecuted in Belgium and under investigations in 2008. We know from WikiLeaks that initially the Belgian authorities didn't want to prosecute, and then that there was very strong pressure, both from Turkey but also from the United States, in order to prosecute. Three high-ranking delegations from the United States came to Belgium to try to convince the Belgian authorities to investigate, to launch an investigation and to prosecute the Kurdish organizations that are present in Brussels. And finally they succeeded to get that prosecution. So all this shows that criminalizing PKK, criminalizing the Kurdish organizations, much broader than PKK, by the way, because in the case in Brussels there were also Syrian and Iranian Kurds and cultural organizations, etc., that were under prosecution. It shows very clearly that it is a purely political matter.
Also, what are the legal political impacts of the Belgium case for delisting the PKK in the other European countries as well?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to very precisely look at what the Belgian court said. So the Belgian court the Supreme Court decided that anti-terrorist law does not apply to PKK because PKK is actually a party in a civil war, is a party in an armed conflict with the Turkish state, and that under international law, then the laws of war apply, which means that both, of course, and the Turkish state and PKK can be still prosecuted if they commit war crimes, or at least members of the armed forces, of the Turkish armed forces, and members of the guerrilla can be prosecuted if they commit war crimes, but not under the anti-terrorist laws. And I think that's a very important decision because it redefines, in fact, the approach to the conflict. Now, the consequences, I think there are a whole series of consequences. Of course, a decision of a Belgian court does not have immediate effect of precedent in other countries. But I think in the defense of Kurdish activists prosecuted in other countries, lawyers and the solidarity movement can rely on that decision to try to break more or less the almost automatic decision that PKK is to be considered as a terrorist organization. So I think this can be very useful in other countries to argue that the different approach is needed to the conflict. The second thing is that if this approach spreads throughout Europe, which will offer much more possibilities for European countries to intervene in a positive way in the conflict, because, of course, if you consider the Kurdish movement as a problem of terrorism, then you can only fight it. You can only try to stop it. If you consider the whole Kurdish question as a conflict, an armed conflict between the Turkish state and the Kurdish population, well, conflicts are to be solved. And so I think if you consider it as a conflict, the approach can be and should be more to try to find solutions, to offer good offices, to try to mediate between the two parties in the conflict. If you consider it as a matter of terrorism, then you can only fight it. So I think this approach also opens the way for more active participation of the European countries in the finding of a solution for this long-lasting conflict.
Delisting the PKK do you think will open the doors to free Mr. Öcalan, and that will also, as a chain reaction, that will also bring a peace to the region?
That is, of course, a very, very, very difficult question, because if tomorrow more European countries take the stand that this is a conflict that needs to be solved and not a matter of criminal activity, criminal terrorist activity, of course that doesn't mean that the Turkish authorities will immediately take the same approach. One never knows when this kind of situation will be solved. Apartheid in South Africa lasted for decades with the support of the West, United States, and the support of Europe. And then at the end, when it became very clear that this was unsustainable, of course also the apartheid state had to compromise with the African National Congress, and Nelson Mandela was released. So, but when and how that process will develop is impossible to say at this time. But it's clear that an approach based on the fact that this is a conflict that needs a solution and not a matter of criminality that needs to be fought is an approach that offers much more perspective for the Kurdish people, for the Kurdish movement, for the liberation of Öcalan, etc. But when and how, I think that it would be that's impossible to predict how things will develop, because it also depends on how the Turkish authorities will develop or will change in the next decade.
Why do you think still the European countries are keeping silence against Turkish war crimes and criminalizing the Kurds, as well as trying to keep as allies with the Turkey and keep the PKK in the list specifically?
Well, I think one could, of course, give a very, very long answer to that and speak about economic interest,
very sure.
and,
yeah, I know,
strategic interest, etc. But let's try to summarize it in one sentence. Yeah. As long as NATO planes depart from Incirlik, I think, which is of course the strategic aspect of Turkey, as long as that happens, the European countries will continue somehow to have a relationship with the Turkish authorities and will somehow weigh or try to weigh in the scale in favor of the Turkish authorities against the Kurds. But I'm very confident that things can change. I'm very confident that under the pressure of the movement, under the pressure of the solidarity movement, things can change, as they changed in Belgium. 40 individuals in 2 companies were under prosecution. An investigation was conducted for 10 years under US pressure, and all that ended in a decision that anti-terrorism law should not be applied to PKK. So I think there are possibilities, but we have to find those cracks in the front on the opposite side. We have to find ways to explain, to gain even partial victories, to try to get things slowly but steadily moving in the right direction.
What else needs to be done to delist the PKK in a legal way? What is the procedure? What else needs to Kurdish community in diaspora needs to do as well? Because it's not only works with the protest, isn't it? So you can add this one as well.
What the Kurdish community in the diaspora should do more, I think, than it does now. And I know a lot of work is done, but I think it should nevertheless be more should be done, is to explain their cause to the European public opinion. I think the Kurds have a very strong position in Europe. There are a lot of Kurds living in Europe.
Are they strong enough to follow the legal way as well, the legal procedure?
Yes, of course,
What is the legal procedure?
Yeah, but I think the legal procedure, first of all, the legal procedures are very different in each country, because every country has its own system and its own system of listing, prosecution, a combination of both. So every country has to develop a strategy. In every country, the Kurds, with the solidarity movement, have to develop a strategy to end the criminalization. On the European level, of course, you can take the case which has been done to the European Court of Justice, a first success was also booked there, because the Court of First Instance of the European Union in Luxembourg actually ordered or cancelled the inclusion of PKK in the terrorist list. But then, for all kinds of reasons, the European Council appealed and also re-included PKK. So it's a long process. Huh? You have to fight all that process. But I think the basic thing is that you have to win the minds. Huh? And I think the Kurdish community there, I meet a lot of Kurdish friends. I see a lot of members of the Kurdish community. I think they should more, instead of working within the community, work with other people, work with the trade unions, work with the youth organizations, work with on a massive scale. There are probably millions of Kurds in Europe. That is, the South Africans didn't have millions of South Africans in Europe, and still they succeeded to have this massive anti-apartheid campaign. So I think the Kurds should really have a strategy of working with big European popular organizations, the trade unions, youth organizations, women organizations, to build this massive movement, of pressure on the governments to stop supporting the Turkish authorities and to at least consider the Kurds as an equal party in that situation, because that can favorize, that can bring a situation where discussion and dialogue and becomes possible.
Dear John Fermon, thanks for joining us. Thank you for your valuable comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.